On the finances, we're looking to see in a general picture that you're able to afford your college education, and specifically, we're looking that you have enough sufficient finances to cover that first year of educational expenses, whatever the tuition is for that university. I think when thinking about the finances, it's helpful to think about in how you are in general paying for your school. What does this look like? Are your parents paying for your school? If so, what are their jobs? Are you receiving loans or scholarships? So, more than likely, don't focus too much on that specific amount, but be able to talk in general about how you're funding your education. Thank you for that question. So, we recommend four different documents that you bring with you. The first is, of course, that valid passport that we talked about. You'll want to check your validity date on that. The second is the DS-16-0. So that's your visa application confirmation page. The third is your valid I-20. So that is the official form that's mailed to you from your university. You'll want to bring that original copy. And number 4 is proof of the SEVIS fee payment. So those are the 4. As far as a checklist goes, the same information is available on ustraveldocs.com, but those are the 4 that we recommend. Something you'll notice there, of course, is that we don't require documentation of your finances. So that is not a requirement for the interview. Sometimes the officer may ask you for additional information or documents, and in that case, the officer will communicate with you directly at the interview if anything else is needed. But don't worry about that. Just for the interview, bring in those 4 forms that we discussed. I'm just going to repeat that same information, is that there really is no one way to show your finances and how you're paying for school. It's more looking at, do you have a plan to cover your finances? Do you have that, sufficiently prepared? So this could look like a loan, or it could not. It really depends on what your specific situation is and how you're planning to pay for school. So the answer is not necessarily. We're thinking more about finances in the broader picture, not a specific amount, but the amount that does need to be covered is at least 1 year to pay for school, that first year of the tuition. This is one of my favorite questions. In the visa interview, it is perfectly acceptable to talk about your plans for graduation, after graduation, no matter what those plans are. And so that could include OPT. I know that's a big draw for many of our students. And I think this is a good thing, too, for us to talk more about logistics of OPT and CPT. What matters really is that you're always in an appropriate visa status. So if you've adjusted to your OPT or CPT, that you're following the rules and regulations. So if this is part of your plan, part of what you would like to pursue, you can absolutely talk about that in the visa interview. I'm going to go back actually to our slide, especially when we're talking about the visa interview. So the interview is assessing your purpose of travel. So this purpose of travel is for you to go to school. So the visa interview will focus on the 3 areas here in the slide. Are you sufficiently prepared for your education, your financial plans, and how you plan to use your student visa? The officer will be looking at the picture of you as a student as a whole. So any friends, family, or relatives that you have is just one part of that picture. Don't be concerned about how that will affect or if, because the interview is focusing on these 3 areas in the slide and determining to the officer your financial and your educational plans. There's 2 areas to talk about when we look at if you're wanting to change your school. So the first is before the visa interview. And then after is if you've gotten a visa, maybe if you've even been enrolled into school and you're looking to transfer schools. So let's talk about both. First, before your visa interview, you want to make sure that your I-20 form in your interview is for the school that you plan to attend. That's very important. So if you have booked your visa interview, you need to be coordinating with that school if you're changing schools to get the I-20 in time for your visa interview. So that's very important. You'll want to make sure that you got that I-20 for the appropriate school by the time you apply for your visa in person. This goes back to looking at that timeline of applying to US universities. So this is where I'm going to give you that another message, right? Is don't procrastinate. We've all been there. I've done it too. I've been a procrastinator. But really you want to be planning ahead as much as possible because these steps can all take time. It will take time to schedule your visa interview, to get your I-20. And so that's why these logistics are really important. So that's before your interview. If you're looking at changing schools, is having that I-20 for the school that you plan to attend. But I also want to talk a little bit about what if you have your student visa and then later on you want to transfer schools. If you do want to transfer schools, you need to contact your international student office. So this is that designated school official I talked about earlier. You can transfer schools and keep the same SEVIS ID. There's no new SEVIS fee required. Now you may also wonder, here's on our SEVIS fee. You may also wonder, do I need a new visa? That old visa, that will have the name of my old school in it. And the answer is not necessarily. So what you need to be a student in the US is a valid student visa, a current I-20 for the university that you attend, and a SEVIS ID that matches the visa that you use to enter the US. So again, your SEVIS fee does not, your SEVIS ID does not change. You just need a valid student visa. If you prefer, you can elect to apply for a new visa that has your new school name on it. And you can, one option for this is to use our interview waiver program. The interview waiver program is for if you're applying for the same visa class, your visa never expired or was never canceled and did not expire more than 12 months ago. So that is one option if you prefer. So the summary of that is if you've got your student visa, you're looking at transferring schools, you'll want to get in touch with that designated school official to make sure you're following your logistics and that you don't necessarily need a new visa, but you can elect to get one. So I know that's way more than that question asked for, but I hope it's helpful to some of our audience. Well, I think we're going back to this interview slide. So looking at what do these three areas mean? We do understand there are a lot of different types of students applying to a lot of different types of universities. And in addition to maybe to different rankings of universities, we also have different university specializations. Some schools that are just for the arts or for a specific type of program. So these questions will really sort of depend on what type of institution, and they'll have a different picture for each student. So even for whatever type of school that you're applying for, you'll want to look at these three areas. Are you sufficiently prepared for that school? What does that look like for you? Do you have a credible plan to pay for it? And how do you plan to use that visa? So be ready to talk about, your school, why you've selected it, how that fits into your personal and professional plans, regardless of the university it is. That's another good question. I think in this case, you would want to explain and describe to me, to the officer exactly what you just described here to me. Is what does that account look like? Who is funding it? So in this case, that it's your parents and how you receive the funds. So it's just being able to describe that and don't worry too much about the logistics. Yeah, so you should, again, always be honest in the visa interview, and it is perfectly acceptable to talk about your career plans, even if that includes your OPT and your CPT. So you talk about, all ways that you plan to finance school. If that's part of the picture, talk about the larger picture, but just readily talk about, what that means and looks like for you. When we're looking at, if you've applied for visas before, again, this is, just one part in your story. Each time that you apply for a visa, the officer is assessing you for that purpose of travel at that time. So every time you're applying, this includes even if you've applied for a student visa previously, the officer is assessing those three, pieces of information that are on the slide. How are you preparing for school? How are you paying? And how do you plan to use your student visa? So each time the officer is assessing your story, your picture at that time. So OPT is an optional practical training. It's a 1-year option to work in the field that matches the degree that you've earned your F visa in. So it'll have to be related to the field of degree that you work to earn. This is an opportunity to use the skills that you've earned in the US. The current policy is that all students are eligible for 1 year of OPT. And for our STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that is a longer period. So that's for 3 years of OPT. That's a little bit of a flash picture on OPT and CPT as well.
Thank you, Megan. The next question is from Sri Ram. He wants to know, I've applied to US and other countries as well. So when asked which all countries I have applied and about my admits and rejects, should I mention the other countries too? I have also applied to only one university in US, and I'm going for it. Will that be a problem?
I think that's great to talk about, all of the universities that you've applied to. Get a picture, right, of how are you preparing for your education? What types of programs, what types of schools are you applying to and why? So I would recommend, as always, being honest in that visa interview and to describe all of the schools that you've applied to.
Thank you, Megan. The next question is from Suyansh. He wants to know, does being an unemployed during visa interview pose a problem?
Thank you for that question too. Going back to, looking at those three interview areas is how are you preparing? Do you have a credible plan to pay? And how do you plan to use your student visa? So whether or not you're currently employed at the time of the interview is going to be just one part of your story. It's one piece of how you're planning to pay. Do you have other sources, other funds? One piece of how you're preparing. It would look different in different situations, so it would really depend.
Thank you. The next question is from Akhil. He wants to know, I have been to US earlier on a J1 visa, and I'm currently applying again for a F1 visa for my MS. And considering I have been to US earlier and did not overstay, showed no intention to be a immigrant, does that increases my chances of an approval?
That's another good question. So for our J visa holders, you'll want to make sure that you're following that 2-year requirement to return to your host country. So first, my recommendation is to make sure you're following that requirement or any travel rules and regulations related to your previous J. This, having done a J visa, again, would be one picture of who you are as a student. That's one part of how you've been preparing for your education, your plans, for during and after. So that's, again, just one part of your picture.
Thank you. The next question is from Vamsi. He wants to know, can my sister be a primary sponsor for my studies? She is on H1B working in US. If so, then what are the documents to be carried regarding my sister's sponsorship for my education?
Thank you. So again, there's no one way it looks like for how to pay for your education. It doesn't necessarily have to be a certain source. So in this case, you would want to describe that's your sister paying, describe what she does, and that type of picture. So again, there's no one way, and that could be one of the options that you're using to pay for school.
Thank you. The next question is from Dheeraj. He wants to know, I'm applying to the university where my brother is currently pursuing his PhD. Will that be a problem?
No, I mean we're looking at those three areas again. So um, that could be part of how you're preparing for your school, or what inspired you to go there. We will be looking at your individual application, separate from your brother's, is how you're preparing, how you're paying, and how you plan to use the visa.
Thank you. The next question is, having funded by a foreign firms like Prodigy a concern?
Again, there's no one way. I think in that type of scenario, you'd want to be able to describe why or how you received funding, and be ready to talk about that.
The next question is from Priyanka. She wants to know, does university rank matters during visa? Also, if one got reject once, what kind of points they need to take care when applying the next time?
Yeah, these are also good questions. So, going back to the first question is, what type of ranking, that where you're applying to and why is just one part of that picture of you as a student. So there's no one university that's acceptable, no cutoff rank of universities. We welcome all legitimate student travel. So that's just one part of your educational story. On the second question as well, that was more on documentation. Is that right?
Yes, the second question is, if I get a reject, what points should I explain?
Yeah.
So
So
if
again, on
someone has
the
got a
prior refusals, yeah. So, and this is for prior refusals for either the same or a different visa class. Your application is being assessed individually each time that you apply. So every time the officer is looking at, has your situation changed? What do these three areas in the interview slide look like for you at the time that you're applying? And I just want to close with a little piece of advice. And I think my advice to you, especially as students, as someone who has gone through the student process, is to keep working hard. Whatever that dream is, whatever you are working to pursue, keep working hard at it. Something I like to say is that somebody's got to get it. Why not you? I never thought that I would be in my current role. I thought, there's no way I would be earning my master's, that I would be working at the US Consulate, and here I am today. So I know it can be hard, especially when you're starting your career, and you're going through this long process, and it is very stressful. You're going through all of your applications. It's a really good sign that you guys are already working hard to get resources available to you. attending this webinar, working with Yokit. And so that's my last piece of advice to leave you with is keep working hard to achieve that dream, whatever it is.